Part 94. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 932. The three of them praised Tang Ning's proposal, and the matter of forming the Western Region Alliance was finalized. Mobile. The leader of G State looked at Tang Ning and suddenly said, although the alliance has been formed, if the countries are still like a pile of loose sand and still cannot stand on their own in the chaos of the Western region, we still need a leader to closely connect the countries together. The leaders of Cheshi Haochen and Cheshi Weidu also understood the meaning of his words. If the Western Region Alliance is just a slogan or a name, then it doesn't make much difference whether the countries form an alliance or not. After this incident, they completely understood that the situation in the Western region is no longer the same as before. If these small countries want to continue in the desert, they must change their previous thinking, otherwise, it won't be long before they will be eliminated by the trend of history. After the two looked at each other, they spoke one after another. This position can only be filled by the ruler of Wutanzi. In the future, the commander of Cheshi Weidu will follow the ruler's lead. The rear city of Cheshi will follow the ruler's lead. The ruler of Jiguo hurriedly said, Jiguo also listens to the ruler. Wutanzi has the military power of the Western Region's alliance, and Tang Ning is already the uncrowned king of the alliance. The words of the three rulers are nothing more than to thoroughly implement his crown and push him from the dark to the light. He showed an embarrassed smile on his face and said, since you all have this intention, I will not refuse it. The three rulers clasped their fists and said respectfully, it should be so. One day later, the ruler of Huhu arrived again. After several member states of the Western Region's alliance discussed, they decided to move their countries together, because the number of people in these countries was not large, and they only needed to expand on the original site of Wutanzi. For a country with a very small population like Huhu, even if they joined the alliance, if they encountered a bandit invasion, they would not be able to wait for the rescue of the allies. It would be better for them to move the whole country to Wutanzi. From then on, they would no longer have to worry about being destroyed by bandits or annexed by big countries. When the Western Region Alliance was first established, there were 6 countries under it: Shanhuan, Wutanzi, Huhu, Jiguo, Cheshi Weidu, and Cheshi Haochen. The troops that Tang Ning could mobilize also increased from less than 100 to more than 800. The people of the Western Region Alliance added up to more than 3,000. 3,000 people, 800 soldiers, such a country is already a second-class country in the Western region. The news in the desert is very slow. It may take half a month or even a month for the news of the establishment of the Western Region Alliance to spread from here to the depths of the desert, but the countries closer to Wutanzi and Jiguo have received the news one after another within a few days. Shanhuan, Wutanzi, Huhu, Jiguo, Cheshi Weidu, Cheshi Haochen, these small countries actually formed an alliance, called the Western Region Alliance, and their strength suddenly increased. These countries can only be regarded as small countries of Class D, but after the alliance, the Western Region Alliance has entered Class B in one fell swoop. Although such forces cannot be regarded as powerful countries in the Western region, no horse thieves dare to attack such countries. Not only horse thieves, even if they want to annex them, they have to weigh whether it is worth it. And all these big countries are in the depths of the desert, which makes the Western Region Alliance the largest country in hundreds of miles as soon as it is established. And the fact that 2,000 horse thieves attacked Wutanzi but were defeated by this small country has gradually spread to the ears of these countries. They recognized the power of Wutanzi again, and realized that Wutanzi must be the core country of the Western Region Alliance. Huhu, Cheshi and other countries joined to seek asylum, and with their joining, the strength of this alliance will be raised to a higher level. For a time, these small countries panicked instantly. Huhu, Wutanzi, Jiguo, Cheshi and other countries are small countries in the same region. They are farther away from this circle and do not have much communication with these countries. At first, they did not intend to join the alliance. But soon they realized that these countries formed an alliance, and the surrounding horse thieves dared not touch them again. But now that the western region is in chaos, there are not many merchants willing to come here. If not, those horse thieves would not set their sights on these small countries. And they dare not touch the member states of the Western Region Alliance, and they can't rob merchants. Aren't they, the small countries that are not members of the member states, in danger? Several countries were aware of this problem, and they soon discovered that there were suddenly more horse thieves and spies around them, and they had obviously set their sights on them. Although the Western Region allies sent them letters inviting them to join the allies, these countries were unwilling to join the Western Region allies. They were controlled by others and could only temporarily form an alliance with their neighbors. More than 10 countries were divided into 3 or 4 different camps. The general horse thieves did not dare to act rashly in the face of them. Just when these small countries of Class C and Class D were in panic, Tang Ning and Tang Yaoyao were drinking iced grape wine in the new city of Wutanzi, watching the people singing and dancing to celebrate the festival. The grapes in the western regions are top-notch, and the grape wine brewed is also sweet and delicious, which is deeply loved by Tang Yaoyao and Xiao Xiao. Compared with mellow strong liquor, these girls still prefer grape wine with a hint of sweetness. The people of Wutan's estate were no longer threatened by horse bandits. Tang Ning ordered people to transport the treasures looted from the horse bandits to Shazhu and exchange them all for food, which would be transported back soon. By then, their lives would be guaranteed. As the citizens let go of the burdens in their hearts, the versatile element in their hearts was unleashed, and Tang Ning feasted her eyes on dances full of exotic customs. These women are all beauties from Huhu country. Although Huhu is small, there are many beauties, and their dancing postures are also very graceful. They are slightly better than what Tang Ning had seen in the capital. The king of Huhu sat below, looked at Tang Ning, and said with a smile, "If the king likes it, these dancers will be given to the king." As soon as he finished speaking, he noticed a sharp gaze directed at him. He turned around and saw Wu Tanzi's mother-in-law, that tall and beautiful woman, looking at him with very unkind eyes. Tang Ning took Tang Yaoyao's hand and refused with a smile, "A gentleman doesn't take away what others like. It's better to keep these dancing princess kings for yourself." Although these countries in the western region are small, the king is considered an emperor and has the right to prioritize resources. Each of these kings has several concubines in their harem, and there are even countries with only a few hundred people in the harem. There were dozens of concubines, but Tang Ning was a breath of fresh air among them. It has to be said that once you become the leader of a country, you will immediately have power in your hands that ordinary people cannot imagine. However, in Tang Ning's eyes, power is not a weapon for him to satisfy his desires. Power is just a tool for him to protect the people around him. The leader of the Huhu kingdom coughed dryly and changed the subject. "The bigger our alliance is, the more powerful our voice will be in the western region. With the strength of our 6 countries, even if they are added together, they are only equivalent to the second-class small countries. Pule, Bailu, Hikayamo and other countries are still unwilling to join our allies." After the establishment of the Western Allies, several heads of state issued letters of credence to about 10 surrounding small countries in the name of the Western Allies, inviting them to join the Western Allies. However, these letters of credence all fell into the sea and there was no response. These countries are allied in 2s and 3s, and their strength is not weak. After all, their national strength is stronger than that of Jiguo, Chaoshi, etc. Each country has hundreds of troops. It is not possible to see a few horse thieves and spies. Big mess. Since Tang Ning established the Western Region Allies, his purpose is not just for these 6 countries. After his mother and cousin were kidnapped by Zioan, there has been no news. He wants to integrate these small countries together as quickly as possible. Although these small countries of D and C are not strong, if they can gather together, their national power can easily squeeze into the forefront of the countries in the Western region and become an A-level country. Maybe they are still thinking about it. He looked at King Huhu and said with a smile, let's wait a little longer. 131-3482. Ruyuxia Jun Jun. Ruyuxia Jun Jun. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 933. Old Zheng and several elders were not at home these days. They went out to subdue the surrounding horse thieves. In fact, there are not many decent forces in the western regions. They are all a group of rabble who bully the weak and fear the strong, but they have the advantage of numbers. If they can gather all these horse thieves, even those big countries will have a headache. With their strength, it may be difficult to take the heads of enemy generals among thousands of troops, but among more than 100 horse thieves, it is as easy as taking something out of a bag to silently eliminate several horse thief leaders. Thousands of horse thieves near Wutanzi state have already fallen into Tang Ning's hands in secret. Old Zheng and the elders are expanding to further places, with the goal of integrating the horse thieves within a radius of hundreds of miles. This will be a huge force that no one can ignore. Due to historical reasons, the small countries in the western regions are all gathered in this area of hundreds of miles. After the establishment of the Western Regions Alliance, it has invisibly promoted the alliance of the other small countries. For example, after the alliance between the Pulihao Kingdom and the Bailuhao Kingdom, the military strength immediately reached more than 700. The alliance of Bailu, Kulai, and Ronglu can gather 1,200 victorious soldiers. The four countries of Kayamo, Ruoqiang, etc. have also temporarily formed an alliance, and the military strength has reached more than 2,000. In terms of the number of people, none of these three alliances is inferior to the current Western Regions Alliance, but in terms of combat power, they are still far behind Wutanzi, who can repel 2,000 horse thieves without spending a single soldier. Even so, it is enough to deal with ordinary horse thieves. However, after these small countries formed an alliance, they had not had time to let go of their hearts, and they received a desperate news one after another. It seems that in order to fight against the alliance of these small countries, the horse thieves in the western regions also gathered together. In a very short time, they gathered 5,000 people, and the number is still increasing. Except for the western regions allies, the other small countries in this area can only gather 4,000 troops even if they join forces. The horse thieves in the western regions are fierce and murderous. With the same number of horse thieves and troops, those horse thieves can achieve an overwhelming victory. In other words, even if their three alliances are combined into one, they are not the opponents of these horse thieves. However, just when the ministers and kings of these countries were anxious, new hope appeared before them. Kayamo State, the king of Kayamo looked at a person below, with a respectful look on his face, and asked, I don't know what the envoy has come to my small country of Kayamo for. Although this is Kayamo State and he is the king of Kayamo, he is still very careful when talking to this young man in his own palace. It was because this person was an envoy from Daewoo, and Daewoo, unlike Kayamo, which had only 1,000 people, was a superpower with a population of hundreds of thousands and a military force of more than 100,000. 100 Kayamo could not compare to one Daewoo. The young man looked at the king of Kayamo with a haughty look on his face, and said, I am here to recruit you small countries under the order of the king. If you are willing to submit to Daewoo, how dare a mere horse thief offend Daewoo's power? When the young man spoke, his tone was full of a kind of contempt. And he also had the capital to be proud. Daewoo was one of the three superpowers in the western regions, with more than 100,000 troops alone. Which blind horse thief dared to provoke Daewoo's subordinates? The endless yellow sand of the western regions would be his burial place. The king of Kayamo naturally knew this. As long as they declared their submission, those horse thieves would naturally not be a concern. But his face became gloomy. Because he knew that after submitting to Daewoo, Kayamo would no longer be Kayamo. Kayamo was not a big country like Gomo and Yushan. After submitting to Daewoo, it could still retain its name in name. For a small country like theirs with a population of 1,000, once it submits to Daewoo, the name of Kayamo will completely become history. In the days to come, their troops will be withdrawn, and the people will be dispersed. Perhaps in just a few years, no one will remember the name of Kayamo, and he will be the king of Kayamo's lost country. The Daewoo envoys ostensibly helped Kayamo to overcome difficulties, but in fact, what they were going to do to Kayamo was not much better than those horse thieves. The king of Kayamo showed a stiff smile on his face and said, "This matter is too important. The king of this country needs to discuss it with the ministers." The young man saw that he did not agree immediately, his face was slightly gloomy, and he said, "Don't think that the western regions are still the western regions of the past. If you, these insignificant countries, don't find a strong backer for yourself, you will be destroyed by horse thieves and annexed by big countries sooner or later." The king of Kayamo didn't want to argue with him anymore. He apologized and hurriedly walked out of the hall and summoned all the important ministers in the country to another hall. "King of the country, this is absolutely not allowed. If we surrender to Daewoo, wouldn't we be the kings of the lost country and the ministers of the traitors? How can we face our ancestors in the future? But if we don't surrender, we will be destroyed by horse thieves sooner or later. If we surrender to Daewoo, at least we can save our lives and may have a chance to make a comeback in the future." After listening to the words of the king of the country, the ministers of Kayamo talked a lot, each holding their own opinions, and quarreling. "Enough," the king of Kayamo waved his hand, interrupting them and said, "Daewoo has evil ambitions. They want Kayamo to surrender, just to borrow the power of our small country to fight Zioan. Rather than being used as a pawn by Daewoo, it is better to fight the horse thieves to the death." After he finished speaking, a minister seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly showed a surprised expression on his face, saying, "King, we have another choice." The king of Kayamo looked at him suddenly and said quickly, "What choice?" The minister took a deep breath and said, "Western region allies." The king of Kayamo was shocked and immediately remembered the letter he had discarded in the corner. It was the letter from Wu Tanzi inviting them to join the Western region allies, which he rejected at the first opportunity. At that time, they still had a choice. Now, they have been forced into a dead end by the horse thieves and Daewoo. If they fight the horse thieves head-on, even if they can win, Kayamo will be seriously injured and may soon perish. If they surrender to Daewoo, the name of Kayamo will disappear immediately, and they will be regarded as scapegoats by others and die on the battlefield. Compared with these two choices, joining the Western region allies can not only save Kayamo, but also have a powerful backer, or in other words, they can become their own backer. The letter clearly stated that the Western region allies would not interfere in each other's internal affairs. Even if Kayamo joined the allies, it would still be Kayamo, and he would still be the ruler of Kayamo. The only difference from now was that when the allies encountered a crisis, they had to fight together with other members to resist foreign enemies. He used to think that this was a constraint on Kayamo, but now, this choice seemed to him like a gift from heaven. The ruler of Kayamo had a gleam in his eyes and said, "Notify the rulers of Kiamai and Ruokiang, and tell them that our ruler has important matters to discuss with them." At the same time, the rulers of Pule, Bilu and other countries had gathered together, their faces extremely gloomy. "Daewoo is going to use us as scapegoats. There are horse thieves coveting in front, and Daewoo's wolfish ambitions behind. Is it that God wants us to die?" After a few sighs, the ruler of Bilu suddenly raised his head and said, "I have a plan." The few people looked at each other and spoke almost at the same time. Western region allies. Tang Ning did not expect that. He did not wait for people from Kayamo and Bilu, but waited for the envoy of Daewoo. The attitude of this Daewoo envoy was very arrogant. He stated his purpose directly, which was to persuade Wu Tanzi to submit to Daewoo. Otherwise, the next time it would be Daewoo's army, not him. Not only Wu Tanzi, but also Huhu and Cheshi countries had envoys from Dayo to visit, expressing the same meaning. It seems that Dayo, a superpower, finally set its sights on these small countries after the war with Zioan. Needless to say, Bilu and Pule should have encountered the same situation. As a result, Tang Ning looked at the face of the Dayo envoy with some unkindness. It was his short-term plan to integrate these small countries together and establish the Western region allies. Dayo actually set its sights on them. Isn't it trying to steal his business? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 934. The longer this trip to Zioan drags on, the more things will go wrong. Tang Ning has been here for a long time. His original plan was that after integrating these small countries, the strength of the allies in the western region would surge again. By that time, even if they are not Zioan's opponents yet, they will have the opportunity to talk to them on an equal footing. This plan, which was originally expected to be realized within half a month, may now fail or be delayed indefinitely. Just when Tang Ning was thinking about taking some forceful measures to speed up the process, Bahar, who was already a corrupt diplomat, hurried in and said, "The lord of the country, Pule, Bilu, Kayamo and other countries. Ask to see." When the alliance was first established, Tang Ning sent letters of credence to these small countries, inviting them to join the Western region allies, but there was no response. The arrival of the heads of these countries in person surprised him for a while, but Tang Ning soon figured out the connection. The people from Big Moon are unkind and demand the surrender of these small countries. They do not want to help them solve the problem of horse thieves, but they want to use them as cannon fodder and die in the battle with Zioan. Being targeted by horse thieves will not lead to the destruction of the country, but surrendering to Dayu will definitely lead to the destruction of the country. In this dilemma, choosing to join the Western region allies is a good choice. Nearly 20 small countries have formed an alliance, and no bandit in the entire Western region dares to covet it. And Dayu's main force is restrained by Zioan, and it is unlikely that he will divide his forces to deal with them. This is a win-win choice. In this way, Dayu actually helped them invisibly. Tang Ning came to a certain main hall, looked at the more than 10 kings in the hall, and asked with a smile, "Why do all the kings come to our Wutanzi country?" Only a few of the kings of the kingdoms understood Chinese, and there were interpreters who translated his words to the kings who did not understand Chinese. The news that Wu Tanzi changed the king has long been spread throughout this area. Although everyone was prepared for it, they saw that he was able to rule Wu Tanzi at such a young age, promote the alliance of the 6 countries, and become the leader of the Western Region Alliance. I was still greatly shocked. After a brief moment of surprise, the Lord of Kayamo stepped forward and said straight to the point, "The Lord of Wutanzi must have also seen the Great Moon Messenger." The leader of Kayamo spoke good Chinese. Tang Ning nodded and said, "I have seen it. Dayo wants me, Wu Tanzi, to submit to them. Humph, they just want to treat small countries like us as scapegoats." The leader of the Kayamo kingdom showed an angry look on his face and said, "The day we surrender to the Big Moon is when we will perish." With a smile on her face, Tang Ning looked at the Lord of Kayamo, waiting for him to speak first. "Ahem, to be honest, I came here this time because I wanted to join the allies in the western region." Seeing that Tang Ning did not answer anything, the leader of Kayamo kingdom was a little embarrassed. He looked at Tang Ning and said, "The situation in the western region has changed drastically. If small countries like us, if we continue to do our own thing, we will surely disappear in the wind and sand of the desert. Only if we unite together can we jointly defend against foreign enemies and continue our country." Tang Ning looked at them and said, "The Western Region Allies is more than just a name. I believe you all already know the conditions for joining the Allies." Kimakuo advocated, All allies must not interfere in internal affairs. When encountering foreign enemies, all allies must unite and obey Wutanzi's deployment. In Le Wutanzi, these people have already gathered together to discuss and discussed almost all possibilities. No one is willing to hand over the military power of the country to others, but if they do not join the Western region allies, even if these countries re-establish a similar organization, they will not be opponents of the Horse Thieves Alliance. Comparatively speaking, the country's numbers and military strength are far inferior to theirs, but they can defeat more with less and defeat horse thieves 10 times more powerful. Their leader must be a hero with extraordinary means. It is not that difficult to accept being subordinate to such a heroic leader. The leader of the Kayamo kingdom looked at Tang Ning and said solemnly, "It is difficult for us as a small country to survive in the western region. Forming an alliance is our only option. We have already discussed it, and we agree to the terms," Wu Tanzi said. Tang Ning looked at everyone and said, "Since you all trust me so much, my country's leader also promises that I will never interfere in the internal affairs of any country and treat every member country fairly and justly." There was still a trace of unwillingness in the hearts of these kings. After hearing Tang Ning's words, the trace of unwillingness disappeared without a trace and they began to think about more far-reaching things. Although they are all small countries like Ding and Si, the gathering of so many countries is definitely a force that no one can ignore. Moreover, the allies in the western region are not simply annexation, but mutual benefit and win-win cooperation. Even if you think about it briefly, you will also know that the benefits of alliances between countries are not just to fight against foreign enemies. This kind of alliance can include military, commercial, agricultural. There were originally only 6 allies in the western region. Now, under the pressure of Daewoo, the number of allies has soared to 18 countries, with a population of more than 20,000 and more than 5,000 victorious soldiers. As a result, in terms of numbers and strength, the western region allies were only inferior to Zioan, Daewoo and Wuzun. Of course, today's allies are still far behind these 3 countries. This is because these 3 countries have almost annexed all the surrounding countries, large and small, in the past few years, and their national power has increased dramatically. However, these small countries have escaped this disaster because they have too many people and not many troops. But even so, the allies in the western region are not something they can move if they want. These kings swept away the gloom in their chests. From now on, the allies in the western region will be monolithic. Whether it is the horse thieves or the 3 countries, if they want to touch them, they must think carefully. Tang Ning took out the contract she had prepared, and the kings took out their king seals one after another and stamped their seals on them to formally form the alliance. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion at the door. The big moon messenger ignored the guard's obstruction and barged in from outside. He looked at these kings and asked with a stern face, "What are you doing?" The leader of the Kayamo kingdom looked at Tang Ning, then took the initiative to step forward and said, "Please ask the envoy of Daewoo to go back and send a message, saying that we have joined the Western region allies and surrendered to Daewoo. There is no need to mention it again in the future." The powerful Big Moon asked them to surrender. Not only were these small countries not grateful, they actually created such an ally in the Western region. The Big Moon envoy's face darkened, and he gritted his teeth and said, "You are so brave. You low-level small countries, you think you have formed an alliance? Come on, can you compete with me, Oyu?" Presumptuous, Tang Ning glanced at him and said coldly, "The countries in the western region are only strong and weak, not superior or inferior. Who are you? How dare you speak so brazenly here?" He looked at the guard at the door and said, "Throw him out." Seeing the big moon messenger being dragged away with screams and curses, all the kings felt extremely happy in their hearts. Although the countries in the western regions did not have superiority and inferiority, Big Moon, as a powerful country, had never put small countries like them before it in eyes. Even a big moon messenger dares to shout loudly at them as the kings of the country? When will these small countries be able to speak so forcefully in front of the big moon messenger? The leader of Wu-Tanzi was indeed a man of great talent and courage. A king looked outside, with a worried look on his face, and said, "Will this completely offend Oyu?" "What's wrong with offending them?" Tang Ning smiled and said, "Will we get good results if we surrender to Dayo? Besides, now that Dayo is being restrained by Zioan, even if we offend them, can they still divide their forces to attack us?" As soon as Tang Ning said this, everyone thought about it and immediately felt relieved. What he said was very reasonable. At least until Dayo and Zioan decided the winner, they had no time to care about him. If they surrendered to them, they would only die. It was better to show some integrity. The leader of the Kayamo kingdom thought for a while and said, "In the short term, Dayo will not pose a threat to us. The real trouble is those horse thieves. Why don't we return home immediately and dispatch our own soldiers to eradicate them completely?" Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "To show our sincerity in forming an alliance, I will leave the matter of horse thieves to me, Wu Tanzi." The kings were shocked when they heard this. After they came to their senses, the king of Kayamo looked at him, confused. "What does the king mean? Wu Tanzi has to deal with those horse thieves alone." "They are just horse thieves." Tang Ning looked at them and said, "To deal with them, Wu Tanzi can defeat them all." More than a dozen kings were shocked by the strong self-confidence he showed. The horse thieves already had a force of 5,000 people, and Wu Tanzi only had more than 200 citizens. How could he be the opponent of these horse thieves? But Wu Tanzi has already had a brilliant record of defeating 2,000 horse thieves without any casualties. Maybe they can rely on something this time. If this is the case, Wu Tanzi's power has once again exceeded their imagination. Even if he surrenders to their hands, it will no longer be a shameful thing. At this moment, that slightly thin figure looked extremely tall in their eyes. Shocked and shocked, they still didn't feel that Wu Tanzi had the ability to defeat the horse thieves alliance. The king at the end of the kingdom hurriedly said, "The horse thieves are fierce. This matter is of great importance. The king must not act out of anger." Tang Ning said, "Those horse thieves are fierce and easy to kill. If we fight them head-on, all countries will suffer some unnecessary losses. As a member of the Allies, how can I watch everyone make unnecessary sacrifices? Don't worry, everyone, how many of my country's lords are there? He is a master, but he can take the enemy general's head out of 10,000 troops. Those horse thieves are just a bunch of rabble. As long as their leader is assassinated, they will disperse in a rush, so there is nothing to fear." Many kings looked at him with extremely complicated expressions. At this moment, in addition to being shocked, they were also moved. Dayo asked them to surrender because he wanted them to be vanguards on the battlefield and their scapegoats, and his intentions were to be punished. And Wu Tanzi formed allies for the fate of these small countries. He not only gave them the greatest freedom, but also thought about them at all times. When encountering danger, he also wanted to reduce their casualties, charge alone, and fight against horse thieves. How is this? Noble. Just now, some of the country leaders were worried that after they merged with the Western region allies, Wu Tanzi would let their country's soldiers charge into battle when they encountered danger. At this moment, their faces were red, ashamed of what they had just thought. Compared with the selfless and selfless King Wu Tanzi, they are all villains. The leader of the Kayamo kingdom looked at Tang Ning and was silent for a long time. Then he looked at everyone, took a deep breath and said, "Everyone, although the allies in the Western region have been established, small countries like us also have the ability to protect themselves. However, in order for the allies to be able to unite for a long time, we need a wise leader. I propose that the leader of Uzbekistan be elected as the head of our allied country and be responsible for all the affairs of the allied country. Do you have any objections?" The allies of the western regions originally had the Wutanza kingdom as the core. The leader of the Wutanza kingdom naturally had the greatest power, but this kind of invisible control was still different from being the real number one of the western region allies. The western region allies already has 18 member states. Tang Ning's goal has been achieved. The next thing to do is to talk to Zioan as the core country of the Western region allies and the leader of the Uzbek state. Relatively speaking, the leader of the Western region allies the title seems to have more weight. However, those horse thieves spies were originally sent by him to bluff and scare these small countries. As long as he gives an order, they can openly surrender to the allies in the Western regions and win people's hearts through this method. No matter how thick-skinned he is, he still can't. Somewhat embarrassed, he bowed his hands to everyone and said, Tang is not worthy of the position of leader. At the end of the period, the king said solemnly, I am too embarrassed to be the king. No one among us can do it. The Lord of Bailu said, for the sake of the stability of the allies, I ask the Lord not to refuse. Tang Ning's words just now really made these country leaders admire them. After all, Wutanzi is already the core country of the allies in the western region, and the Wutanzi country leaders also have the power to mobilize their military power. Whether they admit it or not, they can no longer change him. The fact that he is the controller of the western region allies. Now that things have come to this, respecting him as the leader is just a formal recognition. Please consider the overall situation. Please agree. Everyone knows that the Western region allies must have a leader in order to continue for a long time. No matter who takes this position, no one else will be convinced. He is a talented and selfless leader. Is obviously the most suitable candidate. Gradually, more kings spoke out to dissuade him. Tang Ning looked at everyone, thought for a long time, and then nodded sheepishly, for the sake of the overall situation, I won't refuse. The alliance of 18 small countries in the Western region to form the Western region allies was considered a major event even in the already chaotic Western region. From the moment the news was released, a hurricane blew up in the Western region, sweeping across the entire Western region. Not only it was the Western region, even the Chen state, who paid special attention to this news. The establishment of the Allied powers in the Western regions has a completely different meaning than the change of the leader of the small country of Wutanzi. This means that another big country was born in the Western regions. Although it is not as powerful as a superpower like Daewoo, Wuzun, and Zioan, it cannot be underestimated either. Those directly affected by this incident were the horse thieves near the allies in the Western region, who suddenly no longer dared to act rashly. Within a few days, the major member states of the Western region allied powers saw the heads of those murderous horse thieves near their borders. As expected, the First Lord did not lie to them. These horse thieves' leaders had been killed by his masters, and the horse thieves' forces under them also surrendered to the Western region allies. In just a few days, they not only witnessed the powerful strength of their allies, but also recruited these powerful horse thieves, doubling the strength of the allies. If those horse thieves are included, their strength has exceeded 10,000, officially entering the ranks of a first-class power. It is also because of Wutanzi's strength that they can no longer have any thoughts of rebellion against their allies, and they do not need to rebel, because the allies are their allies. The stronger the allies are, the safer they will be. To protect allies is to protect them. They themselves. At this time, in Wutanzi's country, Tang Ning, who was already the leader of the Western region allied powers, handed a letter of credence to Sadiq and said, I will send 100 warriors to send this letter of credence to Zioan with you. The two armies were fighting, and the envoys were not killed. The letters of credence submitted to Zioan by the allies in the Western regions had risen to the national level. Even Daewoo and Wuzun could not break this rule. Sadiq knelt down on one knee and said solemnly, Don't worry, sir, Sadiq will definitely send his credentials too. This chapter is first published like Have Voice Novel Network, please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 935. Tang Ning will visit Zioan as the leader of the Western Allied Powers. This is the content of the credentials sent by Sadiq. With the military forces of Zioan, Dayo, and Wuzun constraining each other, the allies in the western region were already independent of these three countries and were the strongest force in the desert. Tang Ning's goal of establishing the western region allies has been achieved. He has no intention of seeking to dominate the western regions. When the time comes, the western region allies will still hand over autonomy to these member states. For these small countries, alliance is the only way out. Tang Ning drew on their strength and pointed out a clear path for them. The formation of the Western region allied powers by the 18 small countries swept across the desert like a hurricane. The messenger from Dayo who was kicked out of the country quickly brought the news back to Dayo. Deep in the desert, a huge city rises from the ground. The city is lined with shops and bustling with people. Hundreds of thousands of people live here. This is the real city. Whether it is Wutanzi or the Western region allies, compared with it, they can only be regarded as villages. This is Dayo City, where the Great Moon Kingdom, the superpower in the Western region, is located. Inside the city, there is a magnificent palace. The Lord of Dayo Kingdom looked at the envoys kneeling below, his face was as dark as water, and asked, "Those small and humble countries really dare to humiliate me, Dayo, like this?" An envoy knelt on the ground and said in a trembling voice, "The leader of the Wutanzi Kingdom said that our country is just a country of bandits and wants to force them to submit. It is simply a fool's dream." Another person had an angry expression and said, "Those small countries think that if they are in alliance, they can fight against me, Oyu. Lord, for the sake of Oyu's majesty, we must not let them go so easily." Allies of the Western region. The leader of the Dayo Kingdom murmured these words, his expression becoming even more gloomy. He sent envoys to persuade these small countries in the Western region to surrender, with the purpose of integrating their forces and creating a death-defying army on the battlefield, tearing a hole in Zioan, and the Dayo army followed closely behind, uniting with Wuzun, seriously damage or subvert Zioan. Zioan was able to maintain a stalemate for such a long time with 100,000 troops against the 200,000 coalition forces of the two countries. These 10,000 people were the ones who broke the deadlock, so naturally he was not willing to let his soldiers die. He had not paid attention to these small countries before because they could not catch his eye at all. He had never thought that these small countries with a population of only a few hundred or thousands would dare to disobey his orders. Not only did they not surrender, but they formed an ally and drove back the envoys of Dayo. This was a shame that was difficult to wash away for Dayo. This thing can't be handled well, so what's the use of you? He looked at the envoys with cold eyes and said, "Let Yu Tian and the Lord of Gumo come to see me." Khotan and Gumo are also big countries in the western region, with a population of more than 20,000, and each with more than 5,000 troops. They are considered leaders among the first-class countries. However, above the A-level countries, there are three superpowers. The difference between the A-level countries and these superpowers is not the same as that between them and the C-level and D-level countries. Khotan and Gumo surrendered to the great powers as early as a year ago. Because their country was not weak, they were able to retain the name of the country. Unlike other countries, the king and ministers were executed and the citizens were reduced to lowly pariahs. After drinking some tea, two figures came into the main hall, both saluted and said, "I have met the Lord." The leader of Dayo Kingdom looked at them and asked, "Have you heard about the affairs of the allies in the western region?" The two nodded and said, "I just heard about it. These small and humble countries dare to offend the power of our big moon. They will not regret their death." The Lord of the Big Moon glanced at them and said, "My lord ordered you two to lead 10,000 victorious troops to attack the allies in the western regions and praise our big moon. National prestige. Nowadays, most of Dao's troops are in a stalemate with Zioan. There are only a few thousand soldiers and horses in the city. Although Yushan and Gumo can barely make up 10,000 people, they still need all the soldiers in the country to come out. Even though the leaders of Khotan and Gumo believed that Dao did not need to go to war for a small western region ally, they did not dare to disobey the orders of the Great Yu Kingdom. The western region allies formed by the 18 kingdoms only had a maximum strength of 5,000 troops. Most of them are stragglers and cannot be compared with the elites of the big countries. Khotan and Gumo can use all their elites to wipe them out, so there is no big problem. What's more, the word used by the leader of the Dao kingdom is crusade, which is probably mainly about threats. It would be best if the allies in the western region can surrender as soon as possible. If they are stubborn, they can only be beaten to surrender. The news that Dao was going to attack the allies in the western region was not deliberately concealed. In order to build momentum, Dao even issued a nationwide announcement, and the news soon spread like wildfire. Dao is a super strong man in the desert. In the past 2 years, several big countries have been conquered by them. There is no need for any reason to annex these small countries, which are as small as the smallest. Although the newly established Western region allies can be considered a considerable force, their strength and numbers are only comparable to those of Khotan and Gumo. Now, under the orders of Atsuki, the two countries have joined forces to attack the Western region alliance, and the result is naturally obvious. Ever since she refused Otu's offer to surrender, Tang Ning knew that such a day would come sooner or later, but Otu's response came so quickly and fiercely, which was a little beyond Tang Ning's expectations. He originally thought that Dao was busy with the war with Zioan and could not allocate troops to deal with them, but he did not expect that he could gather 10,000 troops so quickly. They are also countries in the western region. For small countries like Wutanzi and Shanhong, the military strength of the entire country is only double digits. However, Dao has already invested 100,000 troops on the battlefield, but he can still mobilize 10,000 people to conquer them. They show that these superpowers have a strong foundation. My lord, Khotan and Gumo are equal to us in terms of military strength. They used to be big countries in the western region, but they surrendered to Dao not long ago, and now they are affiliated with Dao. When Bahar and Tang Ning introduced the situation, although the expressions on their faces were a little serious, they were not very scared. So what if Yu Tian and Gumo joined forces? Counting the conquered horse thieves, their troops were even stronger than them. When the time comes to catch them by surprise, the strength of the allies may be doubled. Tang Ning had learned about this not long ago. The three superpowers in the western region were not so powerful before. Dao and Wuzun had only a few 100,000 people and tens of thousands of troops a few years ago, but since Zioan was the first to open the after embarking on the road of annexation, Dao and Wuzun were stimulated and began to annex surrounding countries crazily. As a result, in the western region today, in addition to their three kingdoms and their vassals, there are only these small countries that they are too lazy to annex. Khotan and Gumo were considered big countries before. Unlike the small countries of their allies, they often went to war and the overall quality of their soldiers was better than that of their allies. This was something that Tang Ning could not change in a short period of time. Even if they have thousands of horse thieves who can attack them unprepared at the critical moment, they cannot underestimate the 10,000 soldiers and horses of Khotan and Gumo. This is not a small fight between small countries, this is a real war. This was the first difficulty that the Allied powers in the western region encountered after they were formed. More than a dozen leaders of the Allied powers had already arrived in Wutanzi, looking serious and discussing with Tang Ning how to deal with the Khotan and Gumo coalition forces. Faced with such a powerful enemy, there is no doubt that the 18 countries must unite firmly together. Before Tang Ning could speak, these kingdom leaders said that they would gather all their forces to defend against the enemy. All the member states of the Allied powers are urgently deploying troops. As the leader of the Allied powers, Tang Ning needs to find a commander for the allied powers. Old Zheng never forgot to sharpen his knife. Tang Ning walked to the corridor, squatted side by side with him, and said, "Old Zheng, I leave this battle to you." Lao Zheng put away the knife, rubbed his hands habitually, and asked, "Are you going to kill or capture?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "If you can, take prisoners. We are not like Yu, who has a big family and a big business. We should try not to waste." 2 days later, in addition to the 5,000 soldiers and horses gathered by more than a dozen countries, there were also generals from various countries gathered outside the city. Lao Zheng stood in front of the formation, and someone knelt down on one knee in front of him. "Please give the order, Marshal." "Marshal." Old Zheng glanced at him, with a strange look in his eyes, and murmured, "No one has called me that for a long time." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 936. Old Zheng has already led his army in person. There are 10,000 combined troops in Khotan and Gumo. Including the horse thieves, he has more than 10,000 troops. Tang Ning does not need to worry about a battle of this level. The battlefield is Lao Zheng's home field. Dao's crusade army has 350,000 people. Maybe it needs to be taken seriously. It's only 10,000 people. He only needs to wait here for his good news. Wutan's new city is already under construction. When it is completed, it will be able to accommodate at least 10,000 people. By then, a magnificent palace will be built in the center of the new city. Although it is extremely shabby compared with Chengguo's palace, it is 10 times and 100 times better than the earthen house we live in now. Tang Ning heard from Bahur that the western region was not only full of bitter cold and scorching heat, but also had beautiful oases, and the scenery was no less than anywhere else. He turned to look at Tang Yao Yao, who was eating grapes, and asked, "Actually, the western region is not bad either. If you get tired of living in Guizhou in the future, you can stay here for a while." Tang Yao Yao stuffed a grape into his mouth, rolled her eyes at him, and asked, "Are you really planning to become emperor here?" Tang Ning looked at the clear sky and said, "I just realized now that the feeling of being an emperor is actually not bad." Tang Yao Yao snorted softly and asked, "Dear Your Majesty, how big of a harem do you plan to build here?" Tang Ning thought for a moment, shook her head and said, "Forget it. Being an emperor is very tiring. You have to deal with political affairs, improve the national economy and people's livelihood, and worry about foreign invasion. I would rather live in the mountains with you." These were Tang Ning's sincere words. If it weren't for going to Xiaoan to pick up his mother and cousin, he would not be willing to be the leader of the Western region allied country. Not only do they have a heavy responsibility, but they also worry about it all the time, worrying that the superpowers will attack them. Not only that, the transfer of power is also troublesome. If he encounters a situation like that of Chen Huang, he is afraid that I will be pissed to death by those traitors. He didn't miss the power of the leader of the allied country at all, he just thought that Sadiq would be able to send a message back soon, and that Lao Zheng would deal with the coalition forces of Khotan and Gumo soon. At this time, in the vast desert, an army of 10,000 people was moving forward with difficulty. The allied forces of Khotan and Gumo have been on an expedition against the allies in the western regions for half a month under the orders of Dao. Marching in the desert is not easy. You have to endure the scorching sun during the day and the freezing cold at night. If you are unfortunate enough to encounter a sandstorm, the entire army may be destroyed. They were quite lucky. Although the weather was very cruel, they did not encounter any major disasters. Even so, after traveling for more than half a month, everyone was exhausted and had a look of dust on their faces. A general walked to the rear, looked at the Khotan leader who was accompanying the army, and said, 100 miles ahead is the Kayamo kingdom. After marching for so long, they were finally close to the goal. The leader of Khotan breathed a long sigh of relief and said, order the entire army to rest where they are, recharge their batteries, and attack Kayamo tomorrow. The army camped where they were. The moonlight tonight was not bright. The moon was hidden behind the thick dark clouds. There was silence in the desert. The occasional howl of wolves made this silent night even colder. The night was so dark that even the spies in the army did not notice that within a radius of 10 miles away from them, in all directions, countless figures were slowly approaching under the cover of night. In Wutanza city, inside the palace, the heads of the various countries were sitting below, and Tang Ning was holding a battle report in her hand. The night before yesterday, Lao Zheng commanded more than 10,000 allies and horse thieves to attack the enemy camp at night 100 miles away from Kayamo Kingdom. The Khotan and Gomo coalition forces were caught off guard, their food and grass were burned, and their water sources were destroyed. Suddenly, in the dark night, after the poisonous arrows specially made by the elders were shot into the camp, the billowing poisonous smoke ignited and killed less than half of the enemies. The rest of the people were so frightened that they could not form a formation at all. Under the orderly charges of the allies, they were quickly defeated. In the chaos, the leaders of Khotan and the Gomo kingdom were also defeated by the allies. After being captured by the army, the opponent's army was leaderless. In the end, 5,000 people were captured alive by the allied forces, and the rest fled in all directions. Tang Ning looked at the worried and expectant eyes of the kings below, handed over the battle report, and said, "Everyone, please take a look." Although this battle report is written in Chinese characters, many of these kings understand Chinese. Several of them studied in the Imperial College when they were young, so they can naturally understand Chinese characters. Those who didn't understand had expressions of ecstasy on their faces after being explained by those people. 1. We actually defeated Khotan and Gomo. This is the defensive force that Dayo left behind. Before defeating Zioan, they will no longer be able to use their strength to deal with us. The faces of the princes were excited and glowing red. The names of Khotan and Gomo were like thunder to their ears as small countries. They never thought that one day, these first-class countries would be defeated by them. However, everyone also knew why such a change had occurred in them. They looked at the figure in the front, their eyes full of reverence. Tang Ning waited until everyone settled down before saying, "Now that the threat from Gomo and Yushan has been eliminated, I have an idea that I would like to discuss with you." The leader of the Kayamo kingdom stood up and said, "It doesn't matter if you say so." Tang Ning looked at everyone and said, "As we all know, Yushan and Gomo are affiliated with Dayo. Although we defeated the Yushan-Gomo coalition this time, we also offended Dayo even more. When they finish fighting with Xiao Wan's stalemate, if you free your hands, you will still attack our allies." After Tang Ning finished speaking, when the interpreters from the heads of states finished the translation, they all showed worried looks on their faces. They can defeat Yu Tian and Gu Mo, but they cannot be Dayu's opponent. One Dayu's strength is equal to 10 Yu Tian and Gu Mo combined. When Atsuki frees up his hands, the troops that will attack the allies will not be 10,000, but 100,000. Tang Ning looked at the worried faces of everyone and said, "But you don't have to worry. Dayu is currently restrained by Xiao Wan and has no time to take care of him. He won't come to deal with us in the short term. But even so, we can't sit still and wait for death. We feel that now that the army of Dayo is outside and the country is empty, this is our opportunity. If we can attack Dayo city in one fell swoop and capture the leader of Dayo kingdom, we can avoid future troubles forever." After Tang Ning finished speaking, several heads of state who could understand Chinese opened their mouths in shock. It's not enough to defeat Yu Tian and Gu Mo, he actually wants to attack Dayu. You know, Atsuki is a superpower with 100,000 mercenaries and a population of hundreds of thousands. The population of these countries is only a few hundred or thousands, and they would not even dare to dream of such an idea. Even the current allies in the western region are far behind Dayu. If they attack Dayu, Wouldn't they be destroying themselves with an egg against a stone? Tang Ning looked at them and said, according to reliable information, most of Dao's victorious troops were restrained by Zioan. Khotan and Gumo were also defeated by us. There are only a few thousand troops stationed in Dao City now. As long as we send advanced experts to sneak into Dao City and cooperate internally and externally, it shouldn't be difficult to capture Dao. It was Tang Ning's idea not long ago to simply seize Big U. Anyway, the Allies had offended Big U to death. Once Big U was free in the future, these small countries would still be in big trouble. It would be better to take advantage of his illness to kill him, take advantage of Atsuki's soldiers to be away, and the country to be empty, to seize their power and avoid future troubles forever. After more than a dozen heads of state had a heated discussion, their faces began to glow. Obviously, they also realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Most of Oyo's soldiers and horses were outside. Although the forces left behind in the country were not weak, they were no match for the current Western region allies. If we can cooperate internally and externally, we really have a great chance to overthrow Atsuki. That is Dao, one of the most powerful countries in the Western region. If the allies can annex Dao, they will become one of the superpowers in the Western region alongside Zioan and Wuzan. What kind of glory is this? The Lord of Kayamo's eyes shone brightly and he said, the First Lord is right, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. As far as I know, Dao has annexed many countries in the past 2 years and classified the people of those countries as inferior. Untouchables, let the Dao people bully you. There are quite a few of these people. If we can send spies to sneak into Dao City and provoke these people, we will definitely cause quite a disturbance in Dao City. Dao's army is restrained by Zioan and cannot leave. Even if the allies attack Dao City, they will not have time to rescue them. At that time, once we take control of Dao City, they will be cut off from supplies and will have no choice but to surrender. He chose. After Tang Ning raised this topic, she obviously gave them a lot of inspiration. After everyone discussed it for a while, they actually came up with a detailed plan. Tang Ning looked at the crowd and thought that they were not mediocre in being able to sit on the throne of the country. According to their plan, Dao could be disintegrated from the inside and outside at the same time without Old Beggar and Old Zheng taking action. While everyone was continuing to discuss, Bahir suddenly walked in quickly from outside the door. He looked at Tang Ning, respectfully handed something to her, and solemnly said, "The king, Zioan's credentials. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 937. Tang Ning took the letter from Bahir and slowly opened it, and found that the letter was written in Chinese characters. This chapter was first published on ai-u-sheng-novel.com, please remember the website address. The content of the letter was very brief, saying that Zioan welcomed the first king of the Western Region Alliance to visit Zioan City. At the bottom of the letter was the seal of the king of Zioan. Tang Ning put away the letter. At the same time, the discussion of the kings of Kayamo, Cheshi and other countries had reached a white-hot stage. They had all been forced and threatened by Dao, and were fascinated by the idea of taking advantage of the fire to rob Dao. Tang Ning stretched out his hand, pressed it down, and said, "Everyone, be quiet for a while." He was very prestigious among the Western Region Alliance. When everyone heard this, they immediately stopped the discussion. Tang Ning looked at them and said, "Dao and our allies are like fire and water. Sooner or later, they will become a big problem for the allies. Instead of waiting for them to free up their hands to retaliate, we might as well take the initiative and seize the power of Dao while Dao is empty. The first king is wise. This is a great opportunity for us. The faces of the leaders of various countries showed excitement. If they can really replace Dayo, there will be no power in the western regions that can shake them. The leader of Kayamo looked at Tang Ning and said, "Everything depends on the first king. Tang Ning will leave the western regions sooner or later. The development of the western region's allies still depends on them. This time, the action against Dayo will be regarded as a test for them." He looked at the king of Kayamo, shook his head and said, "I have an important matter to go to Zioan. The affairs of the alliance will be left to you." The king of Kayamo's eyes lit up and said, "The first king has a keen eye. If we can form an alliance with Zioan, our chances will be greater." Tang Ning did not explain this to them. Compared with Dayo, they did not seem to be much on guard against Zioan. This may be because although Zioan and Dayo have both annexed many countries, Zioan is not like Dayo, which divides the people within the country into different levels and classifies the people of other countries as untouchables. Instead, it treats everyone equally and regards everyone as Zioan people, enjoying the same treatment as the original people of Zioan. Before leaving, Tang Ning also discussed with them many details about the development of the Western Region's alliance. He used the power of the allies to achieve his own goals and paved the way for them to move forward. It can be said that they got what they needed and no one owed anyone anything. Because they had been worried about that matter for a long time, the group packed up and set off for Zioan City the next day. At the same time, a piece of news that was even more shocking than the establishment of the Western Region Alliance swept across the Western region in a very short time. Dayo, a superpower in the Western region, sent the coalition forces of Yushan and Gumo to attack the Western Region Alliance, but was defeated by the alliance and fled in all directions. More than half of the people became prisoners of the alliance. The strength of the newly established Western Region Alliance once again refreshed everyone's cognition. Whether Dayo is willing to admit it or not, the Western Region Alliance has become a rising star in the desert. Although in terms of number and strength, they are far inferior to the three superpowers of Zioan, Dayo, and Wuzan, most of the troops of these three countries are now deadlocked together, and they have no time to take care of other things, but instead they have bought time for the Western Region Alliance to continue to develop. But there is no doubt that Dayo, as a superpower, was slapped in the face this time and lost all face. There is no doubt that Dayo will not let the Western Region Alliance go easily after suffering such a big loss. Once they defeat Zioan and free up their hands, it will probably be the end of the Western Region's allies. Dayo City. The Lord of Dayo sat on a high seat, his face gloomy as if he was about to squeeze out water, and the servants stood in the hall trembling, bowing their heads deeply, even slowing down their breathing. A man knelt in front of the Lord of Dayo and said in a trembling voice, "Of the 10,000 allied forces of Khotan and Gumo, only 800 escaped, and the rest were captured by them." Bang! In a rage, the Lord of Dayo threw the teacup fiercely over and hit the man on the head, and his forehead immediately bled. "Western Region's allies, you are looking for death." The Lord of Dayo had a frosty face and squeezed out a few words from his teeth. He really wanted to send out 100,000 troops right now to slaughter the so-called allies without leaving a single one, but he could only think about it. 90% of Dayo's elite troops were in a stalemate with Zioan and could not get away in a short time. If he transferred these troops back, the weak Wuzan would be destroyed by Zioan immediately, and then it would be Dayo's turn. Now even the coalition forces of Yushan and Gumo were defeated by the Western Region's allies. There were only a few thousand defenders left in Dayo to maintain daily law and order. It was impossible to go out of the city to attack them. What's more, even the joint forces of Yushan and Gumo failed, and these thousands of defenders would die. It would be fine if these people were defeated by Zioan, but the one who defeated them was a small country that he had never taken seriously. How could Dayo, a great country, have ever suffered such an insult? At this moment, he had already decided in his heart that once Dayo had extra troops, he would destroy this arrogant Western Region's ally as soon as possible. An old man stood below him, with a worried look on his face, and said, "Even the coalition forces of Khotan and Gomo can't do anything to them, which shows that the Western region allies have the strength of a class of power. Should we make some preparations?" The Lord of Daio looked at him and asked, "What preparations?" The old man said, "Now my Daio army is outside, and there are only a few thousand soldiers in the country. If the Western region allies take this opportunity to attack, Daio city will be in danger." The Lord of Daio kingdom gave him a cold look and said disdainfully, "With all their courage, they wouldn't dare. Not to mention whether the allies in the Western region have the courage, although Daio's army is outside, there are still 200,000 people living in the city permanently. Without more than 100,000 elite soldiers and horses, there is no way to break through Daio's city wall." He did not hide the killing intent on his face and said coldly, "I'll let you be proud for a few more days." Zioan state was originally a country with a few hundred people. The original location of the country was not far from Kiamo. Later, after it gradually became stronger, it expanded all the way to the west, and Zioan city also moved hundreds of miles westward. Today's Zioan is actually a country where many ethnic groups live together. The large and small countries that they annexed have completely integrated into Zioan in the past 20 years. It has to be said that in this matter, Zioan's the handling method is much better than Itsuki's. Tangning, Tang Yao Yao and others set out from Wutanzi and bypassed the battlefield of the Three Kingdoms. It took them more than half a month to arrive at Zioan city. Looking at the towering city wall in front of her and the endless flow of people, for a moment, Tang Ning even thought she had returned to the capital. The several-foot-high city wall is not made of loess like other countries in the western regions, but is actually made of bluestone. This kind of city wall is extremely strong. With Zioan's population and military strength, as long as they stick to the city wall, they will have enough food. If there are enough, even if all the troops from the western regions are gathered together, it will be difficult to break through the city. But in the western region, which is dominated by loess deserts, this kind of bluestone is extremely difficult to find. It needs to be purchased from Chen State and then spent a lot of effort to transport it. I am afraid that even Daio and Wuzun do not have such skills. Tang Ning stood at the city gate for a while, and soon dozens of figures came out. This time, he came to Zioan for a state visit as the leader of the Western region allied powers. When he was still 10 miles away from Zioan city, Bahir had already gone to the city to report. There were men and women coming out of the city. Judging from their clothes, they should be officials from Zioan. An official walked up to him, smiled at him, and said in extremely standard Chinese, "I am the Minister of Rights, the First Lord is here. We are waiting to welcome you from afar." Tang Ning exchanged polite words with him, then glanced at the person behind him inadvertently. Her body suddenly trembled, and a look of shock appeared on her face. The man met his gaze and walked forward slowly. Seeing this, the Minister of Rights stepped aside respectfully. The man had a smile on his face, looked at Tang Ning, slightly cupped his hands, and said, "Master Tang, long time no see." Tang Ning looked at him and murmured, "Mr. Su. P.S. I accidentally fell and fractured my coccyx. I had to stay in bed for a long time. Now you don't have to break my legs to let me code with peace of mind." This chapter is first published like Have Voice Novel Network. Please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 938. Tang Ning never thought that he would meet Mr. Su here. This person has a great reputation in the capital. He is the most trusted counselor around King Kong. Because of his existence, King Kong has been able to fight against King Duan for so many years. Later, King Kong murdered the king and treasoned during the ceremony of offering sacrifices to heaven. People related to King Kong were implicated, but the court has not caught Mr. Su until now. Until now, he is still one of the wanted criminals by the court. With the failure of King Kong, Tang Ning almost forgot about this person, but he didn't expect to see him here. He looked at Mr. Su and asked, "So you hid here?" Mr. Su held a folding fan, smiled, and said, "This is Su's home, what do you mean by hiding?" Tang Ning looked him up and down and asked, "Aren't you a Han Chinese?" Mr. Su said, "I used to be." Han people accounted for a large proportion of Zioan city, because Zioan won over a large number of scholars from the state of Chen at the beginning of its founding. If he had already surrendered to Xiaowan, how could he have stayed with King Kong all these years? Tang Ning looked at him deeply, and his heart was filled with a lot of waves. If Mr. Su was Xiaowan's undercover agent beside King Kong from the beginning to the end, then Xiaowan had been planning to attack the state of Chen at least 20 years ago. It is very likely that he was the one who planned King Kong's rebellion behind the scenes. Tang Ning thought that King Kong was desperate, but now it seems that the events of that year were more complicated than he imagined. Mr. Su's expression remained unchanged under Tang Ning's scrutiny, and he said, "I haven't seen you for a long time. I didn't expect that Mr. Tang is already the chief of the Western Region Alliance." Tang Ning had always been wary of the surname Su, and he smiled and said, "Tang didn't expect that Mr. Su was actually an official of Zioan." Mr. Su smiled slightly and said, "Mr. Tang, please follow me in. Madam Tang and Miss Tang have been waiting for a long time." Tang Ning looked at him fiercely and asked, "Do you know why I came here?" Mr. Su said, "Madam Tang and Miss Tang are here, so the purpose of Mr. Tang's coming here is naturally self-evident." Although Tang Ning didn't know what the surname Su was up to, it was not difficult to know from his words that Niang and Tang Shui seemed to be living well here. As long as they were fine, no matter what conditions Zioan offered, they could be discussed. Mr. Su put away the folding fan in his hand, pointed to the city, and said, "Please follow me." Tang Ning glanced at the inscription on his folding fan inadvertently, and finally found something he had not noticed just now. His eyes were stern and his tone was slightly surprised. "It turned out to be you." There was a poem on Mr. Su's folding fan. What shocked Tang Ning was not the content of the poem, but the handwriting. The handwriting was very ugly. As a scholar, it was a shame to write such handwriting. Such a person could not even pass the provincial examination, let alone get a good name. The examiner saw his handwriting and did not tear up his test paper, which was already extremely restrained. However, this ugly handwriting was very familiar, including the time when King Kong rebelled. The owner of this handwriting reminded him many times, which was considered to have helped Tang Ning a lot. Tang Ning had guessed countless possibilities of this person's identity, but he did not guess that the person who told him in advance that King Kong was going to rebel was actually the most trusted counselor around King Kong. Even if he was an undercover agent of Zioan, he would be happy to see Chen state in more chaos, or fall into the hands of a mediocre person like King Kong, so that Zioan would have a greater chance. Why would he remind him on purpose? Tang Ning had doubts in his mind at this moment, and he looked at Mr. Su and asked, "Why do you want to help me?" Mr. Su smiled and said, "Lord Tang will know later." It would be better if he didn't say this. The meaningful smile on his face made Tang Ning more confused. After entering Zioan City, Tang Ning temporarily suppressed his doubts and carefully observed this legendary city. Zioan developed and expanded by conquering other countries. In other words, most of the people he saw on the street were citizens of countries that had been annexed by Zioan. However, Tang Ning could not see the sadness and anger of the country's destruction and the loss of the family from their faces. The pedestrians on the street, the merchants in the shops, and even the street vendors all had smiles on their faces. In addition, the officials who had just come out of the city to greet them, including the guards Tang Ning saw passing by them, were both men and women. Although the proportion of women was a little less, it could also show that Zioan had already walked ahead of Chen State in some aspects. Along the way, everything he saw made Tang Ning full of curiosity about the ruler of Zioan. There was no doubt that he was a pioneer with advanced consciousness. In Tang Ning's eyes, this advanced consciousness was even more valuable than the fact that he had used 20 years to develop Zioan from a small country of a few hundred people to a superpower with a population of hundreds of thousands. After walking for a long time, Tang Ning looked at Mr. Su again and asked, "Where are my mother and the others?" Mr. Su said, "They are in the palace. Don't worry, Lord Tang. I can guarantee that they have not suffered any injustice here." Tang Ning snorted coldly and said, "You brought them here for no reason. Isn't this making them suffer injustice?" Lord Tang may have misunderstood. Mr. Su smiled and patiently explained, "That was a fierce battle between us and Dao Wuzun. Madam Tang and Miss Tang accidentally led people into the battlefield. In order to prevent them from being accidentally injured, our army brought them back." Although this was different from the news Tang Ning had received, Tang Ning did not doubt Mr. Su's words. First, he seemed to have always been kind to him. Second, he would know whether his words were true or not when he met them. There was no need for him to lie to him. Mr. Su continued, "Later, we sent people to the capital to deliver a message, but at that time, Lord Tang's family was not in the capital, so we had to wait for you here. At that time, it happened that Prince Duan's rebellion failed, and Tang Ning's family evacuated the capital, so Zioan's people naturally could not find them." Tang Ning felt a little embarrassed. He looked at Mr. Su and apologized, "I'm sorry, I misunderstood you." "It's okay." Mr. Su smiled and said, "Mr. Tang is loyal and righteous. I knew you would come, but I didn't expect that Mr. Tang would make such a big fuss after only 2 months in the western regions." Tang Ning chuckled and said meaningfully, "Mr. Su made a lot of noise before leaving the capital." Mr. Su did not deny it. He shook his head and said, "The Emperor of Chen did something wrong. This is just a small punishment for him." Tang Ning glanced at him. He forced his son to rebel against his father and almost overthrew the regime of Chen. This was just a small punishment. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "This was originally a good opportunity for you to retaliate, but you told me about King Kang's rebellion. It seems that you are not going to stop." In fact, he didn't need to think about it to know that Xiao Wan was so anxious to unify the western regions. Didn't she want to deal with Chen? It is unknown what Emperor Chen did in the past, and the price he paid now is not small. If Zioan achieves her goal, the entire northwest of Chen will face the threat of the western regions. Tang Ning's mood is a bit complicated. No matter what, Emperor Chen is his father-in-law, and Chen still has many of his relatives and friends. He does not want to see Chen being destroyed. However, Zioan has done him a favor, and Emperor Chen must have done something excessive to the ruler of Zioan. The motivation inspired by hatred is endless, which Tang Ning himself has a deep understanding of. Perhaps it is with this hatred that he can develop Zioan into such a behemoth in 20 years, with the purpose of revenge on Chen. Tang Ning took a deep breath, and with a complicated mood, he walked into the palace with Mr. Su. When he walked to a certain hall, Mr. Su looked at him and said, "Ms. Tang and Miss Tang are inside." Tang Ning and the old beggar Lao Zheng and others walked in. He was not worried about any ambush inside. The Zioan palace could not stop the old beggar Lao Zheng and several elders. He walked into the palace and saw 2 figures he had been thinking about day and night. On the soft couch in the palace, there was a square table. The jade mahjong was lifted up and down, and crisp sounds came from the square table from time to time. Tang Ning stood at the door of the palace, looking at Tang Yu and Tang Shui, who were sitting on the soft couch, accompanied by 2 female officials, and several maids behind them holding round fans and fanning them. They seemed to be in high spirits. Then he looked at their dusty group and suddenly felt a little sad. This chapter was first published on AIU Voice Novel Network. Please remember the website address. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 939. In a palace in Zioan Palace, Tang Yu held Tang Yao Yao and Xiaoxiu's hands, saying something earnestly, with a smile on her face. I don't know what they said. Tang Yaoyao blushed and shook her head. Although Tang Yu's expression was a little regretful, she still comforted her gently. Elsewhere, Tang Shui looked at Tang Ning with surprise and asked, "Have you really become the ruler of those countries?" Tang Ning looked at her unhappily. All this was because of them. Even if they could send a message back, he wouldn't have to travel thousands of miles to the western regions to suffer such a punishment. Of course, he also knew that his idea was a bit unreasonable. After all, judging from the time, even if they sent a message back, Tang Ning would have been no longer in the capital. Let's not talk about this. Tang Ning waved her hand, thinking of the purpose of her coming to the western regions this time, and asked, "Have you found your parents?" Tang Shui nodded, then shook his head, his eyelids drooping slightly, and said, "They died more than 20 years ago." I'm sorry. Seeing her expression was a little lost, Tang Ning's face changed, and he hurriedly changed the subject. By the way, Tang Jing and his wife went to Jiangnan. Before they left, they asked me to tell you this news. Although Tang Jing and his wife were her adoptive parents, they were closer to her than their own daughter. Hearing this, Tang Shui suppressed the sadness and loss in her heart, and immediately looked at him and asked, "Isn't Dad a secretary of the Central Secretariat? How did he go to Jiangnan? Was he transferred by the court?" During the time when the two left Beijing for the western regions, many things happened in the capital, and the Tang family also experienced earth-shaking changes. Tang Ning didn't know how to talk about it for a while. He thought for a long time before looking at her and explaining, "During the days when you were away, something happened in the Tang family. He was dismissed from his post and is now an ordinary citizen." Dad was dismissed. Tang Shui was shocked and asked, "Dad has always abided by the law. How could this happen? What about the others?" "The others?" Tang Ning looked at her and finally sighed and said, "Dead. Dead, dead." Not only Tang Shui, but even Tang Yu's body trembled violently. She walked over quickly and asked, "Ning, what did you say just now?" In order to prevent them from misunderstanding him, Tang Ning took a deep breath. He explained, "During the time you were away from the capital, many things happened in the capital. The Tang family colluded with concubine Tang Hui, bribed the maids around His Majesty, and poisoned His Majesty with the intention of regicide and treason. After the incident, Tang Hui and his brothers were executed, and concubine Tang Hui hanged herself in the palace. Because Tang Jing did not participate in the incident, he was able to save his life, but he was also dismissed from his official position and will never be employed again." Tang Shui and Tang Yu were pale. They knew that Tang Ning would not lie to them. However, they grew up in the Tang family since they were young. The Tang family had great significance to them. When they heard about the end of the Tang family, they couldn't help but feel nervous and burst into tears. Especially Tang Yu, although the Tang family did many things that made her sad and disappointed, it was her home after all, the home that gave birth to her and raised her. Tang Ning stood beside them and couldn't say anything to comfort them at this moment. Hearing the news of her brother and sister's death, Tang Yu's face was covered with tears, and she said in a trembling voice, "They were wrong from the beginning, they were wrong from the beginning." Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao came over and comforted her softly. At this time, Tang Ning was not good at speaking, but just sighed in her heart, hoping that they would cheer up as soon as possible. At a certain moment, Mr. Su walked in from the door, walked to Tang Ning, and said, "Please trouble Lord Tang and Su to go, the king has been waiting for a long time." Tang Ning looked at Tang Yu and Tang Shui, shook his head and said, "Tang is a little inconvenient now, and I will visit the king later." Tang Yu wiped her tears, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "Mom is fine, you go quickly, don't let your father wait for too long." Tang Ning's body shook, stared at her in a daze, and said in surprise, "My father?" Tang Ning knew very little about his father, who he had never met in this world. He was once a talented man from Jiangnan. When he went to Beijing for the exam, he met and fell in love with his mother. At that time, the Tang family needed to make an important political marriage through his mother. In order to resist the family, the two embarked on the road of elopement. What happened later was known to everyone. His mother was captured by the Tang family and his father was missing. Although his mother insisted that he was still alive, Tang Ning was not optimistic about this. He never thought that his father was actually the ruler of Xiaoan. Then, Tang Ning learned everything from Tang Yu. More than 20 years ago, the reason why they were able to escape all the way west to Lingzhou under the arrest of the Tang family and the court was because of the help of a friend. And their friend was the Xiaoan prince who was studying in the Imperial Academy at the time, and also Tang Shui's father. Although the Xiaoan delegation helped them to confuse all the way, it eventually failed to hide from the minions of the Chen court. When the Tang family brought people to find them, they had a fierce conflict with the delegation. In that conflict, his mother was taken back to the Tang family. Tang Shui's parents died. Before they died, they gave the seal of the king to his best friend, Tang Ning's father. He was hunted down by the Tang family and finally escaped back to the western regions. With the seal of the king in his hand, he successfully became the king of Xiaoan with several Xiaoan envoys. Tang Ning knew everything that happened next. All the doubts in his heart were completely solved. He knew why Xiaoan was so hostile to the state of Chen, and why Mr. Su was undercover beside King Kong to encourage him to rebel. This was revenge against the Emperor Chen, revenge for his meddling in the past. At this moment, all of Tang Ning's doubts seemed to be answered. Tang Yu looked at him and said, "Go quickly, your father has been thinking about you." As he and Mr. Su walked deeper into the palace, Tang Ning was silent for a long time before asking, "Is this the reason why you are undercover beside King Kong?" Mr. Su did not deny it and said, "The king has always thought that you have met with an accident. He has led us to fight north and south for many years, constantly developing and strengthening Xiaoan, just to bring his wife back one day." He looked at Tang Ning and said, "But we didn't expect that the young king did this faster than us." After learning all this, Tang Ning did not speak again. Even he could not recover from this news quickly. Chen State's biggest enemy now, the ruler of Xiaoan State in the western region, is actually his father in this world. He was the one who instigated the rebellion of King Kong and the border invasion of Xiaoan. The two of them turned a corner again, and Mr. Su pointed to a palace in front of them and said, "It's just in front." At this time, in the palace he pointed to, a middle-aged man in a blue Confucian robe stood in front of the window with his hands behind his back. The walls of the palace were covered with calligraphy and paintings. If Tang Ning saw the content of the calligraphy and paintings on the wall, he would be a little surprised, because the poems written on the calligraphy and paintings were all moved from another world by him a few years ago. "Who are you?" The middle-aged man looked ahead and said softly, "After so many years, the door has finally opened. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 940. Mr. Su and Tang Ning walked to the front of the palace, stopped, and said to Tang Ning, "Young lord, the lord is inside. You can go in by yourself." Tang Ning stood at the entrance of the palace and stood quietly for a moment before slowly walking into the hall. This palace is not big, it should be a place like a study. One wall is filled with bookshelves, and the bookshelves are full of books. The other walls are covered with calligraphy and paintings. He looked at the prompts on them, "There were waves in my heart." These poems were all copied by him a few years ago. Judging from the paper quality of these calligraphy and paintings, they must have been hanging here for some time. In other words, the owner of the study began to pay attention to him from that time on. Tang Ning looked inside the palace. A figure in green stood in front of the window. Hearing the sound at the door, He slowly turned his head. The moment she saw the figure's face clearly, Tang Ning's heart seemed to stop beating. The face that had been buried deep in her memory and that she had not dared to recall for many years overlapped with the face in front of her. His heart tightened suddenly, and certain images flashed through his mind from time to time, making his nose sore and almost causing tears. He whispered, "Dad." Although his voice was low, it was clearly audible in the empty hall. The middle-aged man's body shook violently. He looked directly at Tang Ning, and the next moment, he burst into laughter. Even Tang Ning didn't notice that his tense body suddenly relaxed. Perhaps it was because his fathers in both worlds had the same face that Tang Ning couldn't feel any alienation when she saw him. And this feeling never appeared before, even when he saw his mother. He gathered his mood, looked at the familiar figure in front of him, and said, "Dad." Tang Ding strode forward, grabbed his shoulders, and said with a smile, "Good boy." During this trip to the western regions, all the things that happened were beyond Kong Ning's expectations. He formed the Western region Allied powers here and became the leader of the Allied powers. The leader of the Zioan kingdom, who was already half the owner of the Western regions, turned out to be his father. Of course, although these accidents are unexpected, they are not a bad thing. He is most gratified that his mother will not be alone for the rest of her life. And even in 2 lifetimes, he had never imagined that the family could sit together like this and have a reunion dinner in peace and contentment. Tang Yu put a few bites of vegetables into his and Tang Yao Yao's bowls, and said with some distress, "It's my mother who made you suffer." The vegetables in the bowl had piled up into a small mountain. Tang Yao Yao blushed and said, "I haven't suffered." Tang Ning had fantasized about having a simple home-cooked meal with her parents countless times, but that car accident took away everything from him, including this not-so-luxurious dream. He thought he would never have another chance to realize his dream, but God finally gave him a second life, which made up for his biggest regret. Halfway through the meal, Tang Ding suddenly put down his chopsticks, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "Since Ninger has come to the western regions, I will pass on the title of head of the country to you tomorrow." Ahem, Tang Ning was shocked by the sudden news. She almost choked on a mouthful of rice. She hurriedly put down her chopsticks and said, "This is absolutely impossible." "What's wrong?" Tang Ding looked at him and said, "Xiao Wan has prepared everything for you. Now, it's time for you to take over." Tang Ning had never thought about becoming the leader of the Zioan kingdom. His purpose of coming to the western regions this time was just to take his mother and Tang Shui back and live a free life in Guizhou. Who would have thought that not only did he create an ally in the western region this time, he even became the young master of Zioan. If Emperor Chen knew that Tang Ning was the master of Zioan, who was against Chen, I'm afraid that I will never marry my daughter to him. Tang Ning looked at him and said, "I mean, if I become the leader of the country, what will you do?" Tang Ding said, "The wind and sand in the western regions are too strong. I plan to take your mother to live in the south of the Yangtze River. Even if they want to go to Jiangnan to live in a world of 2, don't leave this mess to him. Zioan is now facing the siege of Dayo and Wuzhen, and Chen Guo is also ready to make a move. If it weren't for the fact that Tang Ning and he are indeed 5 or 6 years old. They were so similar that he even doubted whether he was their biological child. Naturally, Tang Ning didn't want to be the leader of the country. Even without Dayo and Wuzhen, he still felt that the western region was very windy and sandy, so how could he let Xiao Ru Xiaoi and the others follow him and suffer here? He shook his head and insisted, "The situation in Zioan is tense now. We are facing the siege of Dayo and Wuzhen. I am afraid that this huge foundation will be destroyed in my hands." Tang Ding smiled and said, "Dayo and Wuzhen are nothing to be afraid of. Now that their army is restrained by us, you can lead the western region allies and occupy their main city. Their army has no home to return to and no food to provide, there is only one way to return." Before Tang Ning could refuse, he waved his hand and said, "That's it. Tang Ning opened her mouth, but ultimately said nothing. The two of them had been separated for more than 20 years, and it was time for them to enjoy peace and happiness. Jiangnan was a good place. If Tang Ning hadn't planned to abduct Chen Wang's daughter and was worried that she would cause trouble for him all over the world, he would have wanted to settle down in Jiangnan. As for the mess in the western region, he had to put some effort into cleaning it up before going back. To leave the western region safely, Dayo and Wuzun must be resolved first. Secondly, the relationship with Chen State also needs to be reconsidered. In a short period of time, Tang Ning thought about many things, and suddenly an idea came to his mind. If the western regions could be unified, Zioan would have the strength to directly compete with Chen Chu. At that time, wouldn't it be just right for him to marry Zhao Man and Li Tianlan as the ruler of Zioan? If the bargaining chip is that there will be no more war between the two countries, I think Emperor Chen will be very happy. Thinking about it this way, Tang Ning was not opposed to it at all. Tang Yu seemed to remember something, looked at Tang Ding, and said, "I am from the Tang family. If I appear in Chen State again, it will cause trouble for you and Ning. There is nothing bad about the western regions. Why don't we stay here in the future? I said before that I would take you to Jiangnan to have a look, and I will definitely fulfill my promise." Tang Ding looked at her softly and said, "Don't worry, I have lost you twice, and I won't lose you for the third time. No one can separate us, even the court and the emperor of Chen State." Tang Yu's face showed a touch of emotion, and then she looked at him in confusion and asked, "Why twice?" Tang Ding's face showed a look of reminiscence, and he said, "I once had a dream, and I lost you once in the dream." Tang Yu's heart was slightly warmed when she heard such words, but her face was red, and she whispered, "The children are still there." Tang Ning, Tang Yao Yao, Tang Shui, and Xiao Xiao lowered their heads to eat, ignoring their words. Tang Ding didn't care about it at all. He suddenly looked at Tang Ning and Tang Shui and said, "While your mother and I are still here, why don't you take care of your business first?" "We too." Tang Ning didn't react for a while, looked at him and asked, "What do we two have to do?" Tang Ding looked at the two of them and slowly said, "Your marriage." This chapter is first published on AIU Voice Novel Network. Please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 941. Marriage, Marriage. Tang Ning was so shocked that her chopsticks dropped to the ground. Only then did he remember that there was still one unresolved matter between him and Tang Shui. The two families made a marriage contract back then. Now that Tang Shui's parents are no longer alive, isn't the marriage contract irrevocable? Tang Shui's face was also red, and she wanted to defend herself, but she also knew that with her status, she had no say in this matter, just like Tang Ning had no say. Tang Yao Yao stopped picking up the food and glanced at Tang Ning with an extremely resentful look, but did not speak. Ahem. Tang Ning coughed a few times and said, "Let's eat first. Let's talk about this later." "We can talk about it later." He didn't say that arranged marriages were undesirable or that he advocated free love. In this era, people valued credibility more than their lives. If he showed his intention to regret the marriage, wouldn't he make his parents a treacherous person? What's more, they were betraying their savior, so Tang Ning couldn't say this anyway. Tang Yu looked at Tang Ning and Tang Shui, then looked at Tang Ding and said, "Forget it, the children have grown up, let's not worry about their affairs." Tang Ding stopped continuing the topic, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "I will let Mr. Su help you take over everything about Zioan. From now on, you can make your own decisions about anything about Zioan, Dayo Wuzun, you conquer Chen if you want, and fight Chen Guo if you want, we don't care." He looked at Tang Yu with a particularly soft look, as if he didn't care about anything except her. After finishing the meal in a strange atmosphere, Tang Shui put down his chopsticks and walked out of the hall quickly, feeling a bit like he was running away. Tang Ning chased her out of the palace, and she said awkwardly, "I'm sorry, but you don't need to take what they just said to heart." Tang Shui looked at him with a blush on her face. For a long time in the past, she had regarded Tang Ning as her younger brother who had a rough life. She cared deeply for him and was willing to take any risks and do anything for him. But ever since she found out about the engagement, she could no longer look at Tang Ning the same way as before. Although they have not officially gotten married, it is just a process. With the marriage certificate, she is actually his wife. Similarly, even if Tang Ning had no offensive thoughts towards Tang Shui, his feelings towards her had quietly changed because of what happened. A trace of annoyance appeared on Tang Shui's face, and he murmured, "What should I do about this matter?" Although her parents' orders, the matchmaker's words, and the marriage contract were proof, she could not really marry him. Even though they are not related by blood. Neither marrying nor not marrying. Tang Ning had never encountered such a difficult problem before. She sighed and said, "Let's take one step at a time and see what happens." Although she had never thought about it, when she saw the expression on Tang Ning's face, as if he had suffered a great loss, she couldn't help but feel a little angry in her heart, and asked, "Why, do you think fulfilling the engagement will make you? Is it difficult?" Tang Ning looked at her in astonishment. After thinking about it carefully, she felt that there was something wrong with his expression just now, which could easily misunderstand Tang Shui. It was because he felt that she was not worthy of him, so she hurriedly explained, "I didn't mean that." "Then you are willing to fulfill the engagement?" Tang Shui glanced at him and reminded, "Don't forget, I am your cousin." From what she said, it was neither fulfilling the engagement nor regretting the engagement. What on earth did a conflicted woman want him to do? Tang Ning lowered her head and whispered, "It's not like we were kissing." "What did you say?" Tang Ning forgot that Tang Shui's seemingly gentle appearance actually contained the soul of a witch. As soon as he finished speaking, his ear was held by a delicate hand. Tang Ning looked at her innocently and asked, "Then what do you want me to do?" "I." Tang Shui's tone faltered, he released his hand holding Tang Ning's ear, and said angrily, "How do I know what to do? They really insist on making an engagement out of nowhere." Tang Shui left angrily. When Tang Ning turned around, she saw Tang Yao Yao standing behind him. There was a hint of resentment in her eyes, and she didn't say anything, just looking at him directly. Tang Ning looked at her and said aggrievedly, "I really don't blame me this time." Fairy Tang became jealous, and Tang Ning really couldn't resist it. It took her an entire night to coax her. The next morning, when they got up, they were shocked by another piece of news that left them speechless. "Just 2 hours ago, my parents had left Zioan with hundreds of elite guards and headed to the south of the Yangtze River in the Chen Kingdom." He seemed to be eager to hand over Zioan to Tang Ning, and became the hands-off shopkeeper himself, without even giving Tang Ning a chance to regret it. Tang Ning was stunned for a long time before finally accepting the fact that he was about to take over this mess. Mr. Su stood outside the palace, bowed to Tang Ning and said, "Your Majesty, please come over. The ministers have been waiting for a long time." Mr. Su is the Prime Minister of Zioan. Tang Ning has already experienced his talents in the capital. In the future, he will help Tang Ning to take over and control everything in Zioan. Things went more smoothly than Tang Ning imagined. Zioan's court was established based on Chen Guo's model. At his request, everything was kept simple, with only a simple enthronement ceremony, and he became Zioan's new controller. However, the current situation in Zioan is not very good. The alliance between Dayu and Wuzun has tied down most of their forces. In addition, the kingdom of Chen in the east is also eyeing the situation covetously. Tang Ning believes that with the character of Emperor Chen, after knowing that Zioan has been attacked from all sides, he will definitely not miss such an opportunity, and may have already assembled a large army at the border. Therefore, the most important thing at present is to disintegrate the alliance between Dayu and Wuzun and unify the western regions. Once the western regions become an iron barrel, even the kingdom of Chen will not dare to invade at will. The western region has now formed a three-legged tripod of Zioan, Dayo, and Wuzan. The forces of the three countries are mutually restrained, and no one can do anything to anyone. Once any one of Dayo and Wuzan has a problem, the other party will face a strong attack from Zioan, which will cause their army to have to stay put. Including Zioan, the domestic situation of the three countries is very empty. If spies were sent to infiltrate Dayo and Wuzan, and with the power of the western region's allies, they could be conquered without much effort. Of course, now that he had Zioan's power, he no longer needed to rely on the western region's allies. Tang Ning wrote a letter back, asking them to hold their troops for the time being. With the few troops of the allies, they would not be able to win easily even against Wuzan and Dayo, who had no army. This could only be regarded as a side battlefield at best. The front battlefield where the armies of the three countries confronted each other was the key to determining victory or defeat. Old Zheng was idle anyway, so Tang Ning asked him to go to the front line to satisfy his addiction to being a general. He sent several elders to Dayo City and Wuzan City. Although they left a mess for Tang Ning, after they left, no one would urge him and Tang Shui to get married, which made Tang Ning feel relieved. However, just one day later, Tang Shui left without any notice, leaving only a letter, telling Tang Ning that he was going to Jiangnan to find Tang Jing and his wife, and told him not to worry. Tang Ning held her handwritten letter in his hand, and could understand her mood when she wrote the letter, and his heart was also filled with emotion. Like Tang Shui, after the marriage certificate appeared, Tang Ning didn't know how to face her. The best way was to give the two of them enough time and space, and think carefully about how to deal with their relationship in the future. Tang Yaoyao stood beside him, sighed softly, and said, "I can feel that my cousin also likes you." "Stop it." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "How is this possible?" "This is our women's intuition." Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said, "Not only my cousin, I think the way Princess Anyang looks at you is not right." /U0026LT, script /U0026GT, /U0026LT script /U0026GT, this chapter is first published. Love. You. Voice. Novel Network, please remember the website.